Hello, everyone. It's me, Andrew. I'm here in my home in lovely Ligonier, Pennsylvania. Hopefully, you all are having a great week so far. Busy, busy, busy here, as usual. Today was the first installment of the enameling on steel workshop that I'm taking through Metalworks. Uh, it's done virtually, so luckily I could still go and attend, even though they're physically located in Massachusetts and Ben is located in Indiana. So it's so cool. It just always blows my mind how the internet has allowed us to connect to people and learn, sometimes all across the world. So I think that's a really wonderful thing. The other thing that's been going on, we've been working, getting things ready at the cottage. And we've been doing kind of a two-step shuffle, getting things kind of going because we're still only using one car, so we kind of have to do this kind of weird shuffle. But knock on wood, it could always be worse. So thankfully, it's not so bad. If you're watching, say hello. I always like to see who's watching. Of course, like and share if that's you. If you want us to succeed in life, then then that's a little something that you can do to help us. I see Marianne's watching. Hey, Marianne. Norma's watching. Hi, Norma. Yeah, and then so yesterday, if you did not see, we had a show on cultured sea glass, which is a matte kind of tumbled glass. Lots of fun shapes. I try to pick things that people would not have maybe seen before. There's a couple things that are kind of staples, like the rounds and stuff, but some of the pebbles and different shapes like that. I wanted to have a more organic, kind of natural vibe. So those were shared last night in the live. There were also some mermaid glass, it has kind of an iridescent layer to it, which makes them kind of sparkle, which is a really fun thing. If you did not check our Beaded the New Year Summer a Fantasy Edition calendar, those prompts come at the end of the month. So if you're like, I want to do this, I want to play along, but I don't have these things, you can always come to us. So, that helps keep us in business. So do it. I see a couple more people have tuned in. Julie's watching. Hi, Julie. Marion says, I have added to your success then. Thank you. We appreciate it. It's always good when we've got folks rooting for us as opposed to rooting against us. Cheryl's watching. Hi, Cheryl. Amanda's watching. Hi, Amanda. Yeah, so we've been busy getting things ready for that. At the end of the week, I am going to Baltimore to take a class with Eric Burris in Mokumagane at the Baltimore Jewelry Center. So I'm super, super excited about that. It's something that I've wanted to do for a long time. I actually wanted to take this class at Touchstone. Unfortunately, some of my scheduling kind of got wonkadoodle, and unfortunately, I couldn't take it there. But I won a scholarship at the Baltimore Jewelry Center, so I'm going to be there this weekend learning from Eric. He's actually the person who made this brooch. He does a thing called Brooch for Charity, where he raises money for different charitable organizations. And for this one, he raised money for Surf Plus, which is a really wonderful organization that looks after the health and safety of artists. And if there should be a disaster or something, terrible happens, they swoop in and kind of save the day. If somebody loses their studio or tools or whatever to flood or fire or whatever, they usually will come in and help out, which is a really amazing thing. That's a really wonderful thing. So we were delighted to be able to participate in raising money for that. And then plus we got this really cool brooch. It's really neat. He made it from, I think it's a reflector, like a bicycle reflector. So it's nice and lightweight. And it's, of course, beautifully constructed. So I'm super excited to be learning from him. It's a really cool technique. If you have not seen it before, it almost looks like wood grain, but in metal. So how you achieve that is you take different layers of different kinds of metal and you stack them and you fuse them all together and then you distort the shape and then you turn that into what's called, you fuse them together and you create what's called a billet and then you distort it. And then whenever you get the layers of it, it has all those kind of shapes. Of course, I've never done it before, so I'm probably not the most eloquent person to talk about it until after I take the class. I've done it in polymer clay, but of course, this is going to be a little bit different. So, anyways, I'm super excited for that. I'm a little bit, I don't want to say I'm stressed, but there's a lot of stuff that I have to get done before I can go. And, we're kind of in that hustle phase. So, yeah. All right. So, what else? Did y'all see Jen's tutorial on Saturday? We've been doing these tutorials with Jen of J&T Creations. She's our in-house teacher that does our make and takes on Fridays, on some Fridays. You have to make sure if you're going to be coming in person and you're checking out the classes that you check the Facebook to make sure that she's going to be here. Because sometimes she does things too. And yeah, she can't always be there. But yeah. Anyways, so she taught a tutorial on making spirals. I saw a couple people make some things inspired by her tutorial, which I always love to see. If you do make anything using ideas that we've shared or using product from us that you've acquired from Allegory Gallery or any, AG things, you can always post those in the Allegory Gallery Design Challenge group. That's a really wonderful and supportive group. We did turn on post moderation. So if you post something and you don't see it come up right away, that's why. Some of y'all have been posting so regularly that there's an option that we can turn on where it says, give this person a free pass to post whatever. But most people, since we just kind of turned that on recently, it will take a little bit until either William or I or other moderators see it and can approve the posts. But we were getting there was a lot of Temu and Shein and have you bought these shoes kind of posts in the group. And dead celebrity posts. So those are all kind of, if you see those, don't click them because those are spam. And so because we had the group open and it's been growing pretty rapidly, we've had the group for several years and it had always been kind of small. But over the last couple of years, it's kind of built up some steam. So it's growing little by little. It's not like some of these crazy groups. I see some of them and they're like 85,000 people. And I was like, I can't even imagine trying to moderate that many people. So I'm kind of glad that we're kind of small but stout, as my grandma used to say. And yeah, so anyway, so that group is a really wonderful, supportive group. And I definitely encourage you to join if you haven't joined. We're building that group up. For a while, we were talking about maybe changing the name because some of our friends, they have these really cute names for their groups, or the people who watch their groups. And then at this point, we've done so many videos and stuff promoting the Allegory Gallery Design Challenge group that I don't know, it might be too late, you know. We go back and forth about this. We're like, oh, we want to have a cute name for our group. We want a cute name. And then when we kind of come up with one, then we're like, oh, but we just did a video and it said go to this group. And so anyways, welcome to our life, basically. I see a couple more people have tuned in. Barnaby's in the background. I don't know if you can hear him. He's been singing all day, which has been super cute. Him and Gilbert have been singing. So I'm like, is William stuck in the well? What is it? What is it? Harry's watching. Hi, Harry. Teresa's watching. Hi, Teresa. Yeah, so we've been busy. I don't know. Summer seems to be that time of year that's flying by. That just seems to be going by like at warp speed. There are times when everything kind of feels like slow, and I feel like I just like blink and then like hours pass. So I don't know if that's like a sign of strokes or something, or just like life. But anyways, also this weekend after my class, I'm going to pick up the first of the jeweler's benches for Butcher Block Gallery. I don't know if y'all know about that. Some of y'all know about that because y'all are on our Patreon. I know, so many things, so many things. We do so many things. I'm like, and then see us here, and then see us here. But yeah, so we have a Patreon for Star Cottage Studio, which eventually, like most things, will change and evolve and kind of encompass all of the things that we do. And one of the things that we like to do is, I don't know, was this on Patreon or was this on that a fundraiser we did? Anyways, at some place that we had something out there in the universe, we talked about how we were getting benches for the new store, which is Butcher Block Gallery, which is a contemporary jewelry gallery that's opening in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And my goal is to open that in September of this year. We had said this summer, but it's not going to happen, y'all. It's not. And I guess it's when I'm thinking about, I don't want to say anything, I don't want to say the date completely yet because I need to talk to William first, because I'm gonna be like, oh, by the way, I just imposed this huge deadline on us. Please enjoy. So that's coming up in September, hopefully. And one of the things that we decided to do is we get asked for classes all the time on metalsmithing. And originally I was thinking of having classes at the cottage. However, our bathroom situation there has kind of hit a roadblock, and we just kind of have to wait things out. And that's like the most annoying thing of all time, is waiting things out like that. So we're gonna hang on and maybe one day, someday, get the bathroom situation figured out at the cottage. But for now, we're just going to try to move different things over to the new building, since it's already set up. There's already a bathroom, there's street parking, there's different things like that. So, and I think it'll be a good way to supplement the income of the new business as we grow it. Because I want to focus on contemporary jewelry, and that's not always, I shouldn't say that it's not something that is commercially viable, because of course we're starting a business about it, so one would hope that it's commercially viable. But like in the area that we are going to put it, they may not necessarily appreciate right at first, jewelry made out of like doll parts, for example. But so most of what we're going to be doing is online. And as that builds up, then we're going to slowly kind of flesh out the physical store there. And we're also going to start offering some classes so that we can engage people and help educate people and introduce them to new things that they may not have been familiar with, and also to become a destination, kind of like what we did with Allegory Gallery in Ligonier. As many of you know, I've told this story probably a thousand, if not more times. Is that when we first tried to open this store, I went to the bank with my business plan, or our business plan, and the bank manager laughed in my face and they said, no, definitely not. This is something that's never been done before, and you're going to be closed within 6 months. And they laughed in my face. So I don't want to say that I'm stubborn, or a little bit bullheaded. But when that happened, I was like, I don't care what happens. I have to succeed at this. Just to be, I shouldn't say this, that to have a business out of spite, but that did not not have a factor in why we kept going. But that business or that bank is no longer there. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it's one of those things where if you don't know, you don't know, right? I can't count how many times people have come into the store and said, I don't know how you make any money, because they'll see like beads on the table for like 25 cents or 10 cents, excuse me. And they're like, how do you pay your mortgage? And we're like, we sell a lot of those 10-cent beads. No, but seriously, if you don't know about something, then it's hard to imagine it having any kind of profitability to it. So it took a while, but I think we've converted some folks over to our side to see, after almost 13 years of business, that we're here and we're here to stay. So yeah, I see a couple more folks have tuned in. It's always nice to see people watching, because sometimes we get like 4 people watching, and I don't mind it. I'm happy to hang out with folks if there's 4 or 40 people or 400 people. I'm actually like it when it's not necessarily a small group, because then you're like, so then what? And then what? But sometimes when it's super, we used to get hundreds of people watching, and it's just the comments, and you cannot see any of the comments. So I like how we're small enough that we can engage our customers and our supporters, and we can get to know everybody. Like, I know people's favorite colors, and I know their least favorite colors. Marianne says, do you know what the kittens are up to? The kittens are in their room, and they're being good because I can't hear anything bad happening. But yeah, they've been very rambunctious lately. But I think, that's just being kittens, right? So we play with them a lot. And I'm trying to do these things where I bond with them separately, so that they don't, I don't know. I just want to have relationships with them. And so, it takes a little while. And they're super cute. Heather, hey, Heather. Heather says, hey, everyone, Texas Hill Country is hot today again. Watching tennis and tutorials, pool acrobats at 5:30. That sounds nice. Let's see, who else is watching? Diane says, I have been feeding the dogs, so I'm just going to say hi, everyone. Again, to cover everyone who came in. Yeah, I'm kind of like that too. I'm like, at the first, January 1st, I'm like, happy birthday, everyone. So that in case I missed your birthday, it's like a blanket statement. Hello, everybody, for the next year. Um, Julie's watching. Hi, Julie. A couple more people have tuned in. Let's see. Julie said when it's quiet is when you really have to worry. Yes, but or it's either that or they're sleeping, which is what I like. Is I like it when I shouldn't say that, but there are times when they get wild, like they get really, really wild. I am like researching on my phone. I'm like helmets for kittens because they beat each other up so much, and like I always worry that they're going to get like brain damage, of course, but also that we're going to like take them to the vet and then they're going to be like, oh, your cat has brain damage. And then we have to call the police on you for like animal abuse. I was like, well, I didn't abuse them. They abuse each other. Um, it's kind of like me and my siblings when we were young. I don't know how, like, there's like miracle bubble around us, but there are times when we used to get up to no good, and I'm surprised that we're alive. And I'm not going to tell the stories because sometimes my mom watches these and she's going to be like, oh, so you did what? Um, and so I don't want her to get mad at me. I'm going to get a phone call after the live. Bonnie's watching. Hi, Bonnie. Facebook users watching. Um, if you haven't recently done this, go over in the link of this video. You can always go to the link in this video and the StreamYard link and click that. Sometimes you have to click it again and reconfirm if there's an update on their end, on your phone's end, on Facebook's end, on YouTube's end. Where however you're watching these things, if there's one update, it kind of forces you to re-sign up, and that's so that we can see who's watching, because sometimes we don't get to see, and then I'm like, I don't know who it is, and then I just don't know who it is then. Oh, Paula's watching. Hi, Paula. Julie says she has 7 cats, and yes, I had 2 sets of kittens. I know how it is. Yeah. All right. So we've been super busy. I did want to remind people, if you're, I don't know if this is available, but today's Amazon Prime Day. And so if we have any links in our videos that we post, the affiliate links, if you click on those, we get a kickback. So um, if you're like, I'm going to buy a TV on Prime Day, click on one of our affiliate links and then go and hunt your TV down, because then we get a little bit something slipped under the door. And then also, I wanted to remind people that we do have a book club. We are currently only meeting online, and the book club book for this month is When Women Were Dragons. And that, I believe there's a link to that. If not, William or I will post a link to it. Because, yeah, I think people will really like it. And it kind of plays into the summer of fantasy. I don't want to say we planned this, but we kind of planned this. You may have noticed that. So, yeah, we I'm excited. It looks like a good book. So for today, speaking of summer fantasy, for today's prompt, we have a prompt that says to make a pair of earrings inspired by wings. And it doesn't say what kind of wings, so you could take that in a lot of different directions. You could do bat wings, you could do angel wings, you could do fairy wings, you could do dragon wings, you could do bird wings, you could do airplane wings, you can do paper airplane wings, you could do all kinds of things. You could do chicken wings if you wanted to go in a more whimsical way. I think that I kind of wanted to, I want to do that maybe in maybe the polymer clay group. When I started making polymer clay things, one of the first things that we did was we made tiny food. I don't know if y'all did that also. If you have had a chance to do it, but there was a book, and we must have checked it out of the library 1,000 times. And at that point, like the binding was pretty much disintegrating, but it was like making miniature food out of polymer clay. And let me just tell you, all of the food in that book was made. And so, yeah, that was fun. So, anyways, I kind of want to do that, but is make a whole thing of food related, tiny food things, of course. So, um, anyways, I digress. We're going to do a seed beaded, of course, tutorial. We still haven't gotten the tires fixed just quite yet. It's going to happen sometime this week. And yeah, so we're going to be doing that sometime this week. And then I can do more things at the cottage. Right now, William is at his other job. So unfortunately, that means I'm homebound. And so I guess it's not too bad because it's forced me to do more seed beading, which I don't usually give myself the permission to do seed beading because it is something that usually takes a little bit longer to do. And so, so I think this has been a really nice kind of break. It's been a nice way to kind of do things that I normally wouldn't do. It kind of pushed me into doing stuff and revisit things that I haven't done in years. So I hope that people have been enjoying it. I've been enjoying it. I've been making a lot of stuff, and I have to finish up a lot of stuff because a lot of it is still a UFO, unfinished object. So, and there's a couple of things that we're trying to do logistically, but I'm not going to talk about those things just yet because we still have to finagle the calendar. But yeah, we've got some things going on in the works. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And yeah, Bunny says, I walked 3.5 miles to get my lunch today. Don't need a car. Well, good on you, Bonnie. I'm not walking to the cottage. You have to go on the highway. That's the end times. So I see people doing it, and I was like, "There's no way." And it's not that it's particularly unsafe or that it's undoable. Like if I got a bike, I could probably do it and feel a little bit like it wouldn't take me all day to walk there. But sometimes people drive very quickly on the road that the cottage is on, and they don't always pay attention. So that's where my concern is. I kind of like the idea of being able to like walk to the studio or whatever, but that danger time. So I don't know. I'm always thinking about that. Michelle says, very normal to have UFO in seed beating. Correct. There was this meme going around, and they're like, you'll become a ghost if you have any kind of unfinished things in your life. And then all the beaters are like, they start sweating. And there is another one that says, you'll live forever if you have projects that you are trying to finish. And then they're like, or you'll live as long as you have projects to work on. And then people are like, well, I'm going to live forever. Harry says, your beading has inspired me to plan some new projects like eyeballs and a beaded bezel. Yeah, do it. Yeah, there are some really wonderful people who incorporate eyeballs in their jewelry work. If you don't know who Laura McCabe is, I don't know, I think she used to be a costume designer or a taxidermist or maybe both. And she would get the taxidermy eyes and would do these beaded bezels and things like that, and make those, incorporated them, and those were always really really cool. And then there was also Betsy Youngquist, who um, does stuff with epoxy. I don't know if it's epoxy. I actually don't know how she makes her pieces. At one point, I saw one of her videos and I zoomed in on the video to see what she was using. And I think for some of her sculpture, she was using tacky glue. But for some of the little bezels, I think they're epoxy clay. Because I've made stuff that kind of looks like that too. And I was like, oh boy, that looks so close. And then I got nervous. But because, there's this big thing about people copying in the beading world, and it's pretty rampant. And sometimes people, they actively go after and take other people's ideas and claim them as their own. And then sometimes an idea is just a good idea, and like people come to the same idea at the same time. I remember there's this one bead, maybe a super duos, I can't remember, but somebody made a super dew or a snowflake, and they lost their SHIT because they thought somebody was copying them. And I was like, it's got two holes. It's not got that many options. And so like I don't know, but they thought that somebody had stole their idea, and they just like had a freeform meltdown. And it's like, that's pretty much like where you would kind of go, if you're like thinking winter and you have this kind of bead and you're going to do it in this one of these stitches. That's kind of like the natural progression. So it's not to say that that doesn't happen, because I've been on the other end of that, where people have seen stuff that I've made. And I think also now I'm kind of at the point where it's not that I don't care, but I am also less proprietary over what is necessarily mine. And I would rather, this is, you have to take this with a grain of salt, because this is not like a blanket statement or permission to knock me off or whatever. But like if somebody starts doing silhouette portraits of me, and then that might not be awesome. But I kind of feel like we're at a point in this kind of democratization of craft information, in the accessibility of information, that I'm more curious about what other people are going to do with the ideas, and how we can share and kind of think tank different ideas, as opposed to like claiming stuff. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but like all things that I show in my tutorials, if I'm not ready to get rid of sharing that out into the world, I'm not going to. But I saw one of my friends, there's this woman in Turkey who's bootlegging every one of her designs, and it's not a situation of imitation as a form of flattery kind of thing. It's like, I'm going to become the single white female of you. And yeah. But anyways. Yeah. Harry says, that is what I use. Glass eyes, both animal and people eyes. I have maybe 30 necklaces with eyes. Yeah, I've seen some of your eye work. And it's pretty cool. I think, didn't you have one with like little angels or something? And it looked, I don't know. I kind of like that mixture of kind of the macabre and kind of sweetness.
Hello.
Hi, William. Are you filming tonight?
No, I'm going to go mow.
Oh, where?
In the cottage.
I was like, here, the cottage?
Well, I'd like to do both, but I'll probably get the cottage.
Okay. Anyway, so there's a couple people, speaking of the eyeballs, Kinga, she does a lot of stuff with eyeballs. And this is not to say that nobody can do eyeballs, that you're like, been there, done that. But there's a lot of people who are doing a lot of different things. So anyways, I don't want to get on like a soapbox or anything, but I kind of did. Rosie's watching. Hi, Rosie. Tallulah's here, chewing on something.
Where'd my little escapee go?
Maybe finger swap her out. Oh, she didn't get it. It's on the floor.
What are you doing?
Don't step on my stuff. There's Tallulah. Getting up to no good. They do this like prison break. And there's like a sacrificial lamb, like where one of them gets caught so the other two can escape. And then it's always different too. Anyways, so and Bonnie says she's so cute. She is. She was so charming to the vet. The vet kept saying, I like her. I like her. She's so pretty. And I was like, I don't know what you're trying to angle at. I'm not going to give you my cat. And I was like, also, my other kittens are cute and beautiful as well. No, we really like our vet, so I'm not going to try to cause any problems. All right, I'm going to flip the camera around, and then we're going to start on our project. How about that? Otherwise, we're going to be talking until the end of time, and then I'm going to get myself in trouble for free associating. So you're going to see the ceiling for a moment. Harry says, I cast bigger cherubs with a cat head today. It has smaller wings and rests against a fluted column that is a vase. That's cool. So as you can see, one of our projects in the summer of beading or summer of fantasy should be like a Cinderella challenge called cleanup time or something, because my area is getting disasperated. And it's not actually my area, it's actually William's area. And so he was like, oh, I'm going to do the live at the house. And I was like, no, you're not. And he was like, what? And I was like, I got my stuff strung out and we're not going to play this game of seek and find. So, yeah. Okay. So before we get started, I wanted to reiterate that depending on the beads that are you going? William's headed off to the cottage. He's going to mow the grass. Did you get gas, William? Did you get gas?
Yeah, I got it yesterday or the day before.
Okay.
I'm going to take these little boys out too a little bit.
Oh, okay. All right. Michelle says that's so normal, Andrew. It's not messy yet. William he's not a seed beater. So when he sees this, his eyes got big around like a saucer. And I said, avert your eyes. Because I could see he started breathing a little bit different and his eyes got big. And there's other areas on this desk. This is like I tidied up a little bit before I went on camera because I got all kinds of stuff. Like I started doing, okay, so I'm going to tell it. I'm going to truth tell it. So I am not necessarily a chainmail person. And so one of the prompts is to use chainmail. And so this thing is taking me forever to do. And I don't know, it hurts my hands. I'm not that interested in it. So it kind of it's just not really going anywhere. But of course I've strung everything out for it. So I kind of feel like I have to finish it. And then of course I did like one start and then it started going in the other direction. And then I was like, I don't know how that happened. So anyways, there's this little grub. And so yeah. Anyway, so yeah, hi Brooke. Thanks for joining us today. Anyway, so all right. For our project today, I'm not going to use the smoke color. I'm going to use the crystal in the fire line on the thermally bonded thread. It's the crystal. This is the 8-pound. think this is the 8 pound. And I'm also going to use um, a size 10 to 12 needle. Um, One thing I will caution you all is I know some people, when they get a needle, they're like, I'm going to use this needle until the end of time. It is got imbued with my DNA and it shall be mine forever and all eternity. And one of the things about that is that's fine if you're all using the same, if you're using the same size seed beads. But I was using a size 10C needle and I was working with 15s. And one of the things that I noticed, I started seeing these little flecks of glass on my work surface. And it's because I was going through too many passes with the beading needle and the big beading thread, and it was chipping some of the size 15 seed beads in one of the projects that I'd worked on. So just keep that in mind. Just swapping it out for a slightly smaller. It almost looks like it's minuscule is the difference between a 12 and a 10 seed beading needle, but it makes a difference. So I was actually splitting some of the beads. So don't do that. All right. Brooke says, I've broken both needles and beads that way. Yeah. Brooke says, a good set of pliers can make a real difference for your hand. I have all the pliers, I got fancy pliers, ergonomic pliers. I got animatronic pliers, and it's just not for me. There are some things like, I really like drumming, and I've been to these drumming circles and stuff, and I like how there's like this energy about it. And I know a couple people who make drums and they really are inspiring. But you know what? That's just not for me. It's just like, it just so feels so weird to me. And at one point, I had to go to this group, and it was like a healing through sound vibration thing. And I'm pretty woo woo. If y'all know me, then you know that about me, that I kind of I'm all about it. Let's get this song bowl singing business. And they passed around these drums, and I felt so dumb. And so there's some things that is just like, it just, I don't want to say it feels wrong, but there you have it. All right. So I've got some size 8 um, seed beads. These are Czech seed beads. So some of them are wonkadoodle a little bit. They're not evenly and consistent, which is fine. If you have, for this pattern, you don't necessarily need them to all lay in place. But, that helps sometimes. And if there are any of them that are super weird, then we can always take them off. I've also got these pearlescent drops, CB drops. And these ones are, there are a 3.4 millimeter Ceylon light yellow Mayuki drop. So these are Japanese ones. Those are super consistent. You're going to see what we're going to use those for later. I've also got some of these size 11s, and they are, I'm not going to be able to see this label because it's done faded into the universe, but they are I got them from Twisted Sister. So Leslie Pope, she would know what they are. I believe they're a coated silver, frosted silver, in a cream color, which is nice. But anyway, so these are these. We're gonna need a few of these for our finishing. I've got some ear wires. I have a variation on this project, and I have sequins. I have vintage sequins, and those can be used to jazz up this project. But I'm going to show you the basic, and then I'm going to show you the look of what happens when you add sequins. So it's up to you whether you use it or not. Some people like them. Some people are like, oh. So that's up to you. And then also I've got some of these metal They're size 8, but they're slightly smaller than these ones, of these brass kind of gold tone metal beads. And I like those because they give a little bit of a bling to the project. So, and I'm keeping with a pearl kind of color tone with gold. But again, depending on what colors you use in your project, it's going to determine how it looks. So keep that in mind. All right. And also, depending on the sizes that you use of seed beads, you can play around with the different sizes and it will create a similar pattern but have a different look. So, if you want to play around with that, feel free to do so. All right, I've strung up a wingspan of this crystal beading thread. I'm going to pick up 2 of these size 8 seed beads. Now, also, one thing I should mention is that if you go through your seed beads and you see one and it has kind of a defective hole, it doesn't mean that the whole batch is defective. Sometimes, like there's like they got a little bit too hot and the hole closes up a little bit. But just pick it out. Don't try to force that one into it. Or if there's like a tumbled or a matte medium or a matte finish bead, sometimes the whatever they use to tumble the beads gets stuck into it, the grit. Um, and you just use an awl to poke it out, or you can use your needle to try to poke it out, or just set it aside and use one that has a free and clear hole. And it will save you a headache in the future. Because I've been in the position where I'm like, oh, I'm almost out of seed beads. I gotta use every single seed bead. And then I end up causing problems later. So just keep that in mind. All right. All right. So I'm going to pull these 2 down until I get to roughly 4 or 5 inches to the end. I've got these like so. I'm going to take my needle and go up through the first bead that I strung from the front, but I'm only going through that first bead. All right. And then the goal is to make them sit next to each other like so. They're going to sit on the bus together. And, if you see people sitting on top of each other on the bus, then you have to look away because they're probably getting up to no good. But with this, you want them to sit nice and politely side by side. So this is coming out the top of bead 1. We're going to go down through bead 2. And that's going to I made a little knot. Pick out any knots as you go. Don't try to force it, because if you try to force it, then you have regret later. One thing I want to say is that when you do this, you're going to want to, like everything, tension is key, is king. And you gotta have a little bit of faith, because sometimes when you start a seed bead project, it looks like somebody chewed it up and spit it out, and it doesn't look like anything. And then you keep working, and then eventually the tension pulls together and it comes together, and it's not so loosey goosey style, and it kind of it shapes up literally. So keep that in mind. You want to keep a tension that's firm but not too firm, because we're gonna have to bend this. So what we're doing right now is called a ladder stitch. So I'm gonna pick up another of this size 8 seed bead. I've got it on my needle. I'm gonna go down through number 2 bead in my sequence, and then up through the 3rd bead that I just added. Now, the goal is to have this sit side by side with the one that you just added. So you have this little row of um, seed beads all sitting in a row. All right. So I see. What is this? Get your lights close to you. I don't know what that means. Anyway, so I've got this. I'm going to then fold these over, gently encouraging these. And I'm going to pull this tail out of the way. I'm going to hold the tail between these two fingers so it's out of the way. And then I'm going to take this thread, and this is number 1, number 2, number 3. I'm going to go back around in number 1 bead and through number 3. And that's going to create a thread bridge. And we're going to basically, we're going to be doing, oh, I see somebody's having tornado time. Stay safe out there. All right, so basically you have this little triangle of seed beads, all right? And that's the form of your circular brick stitch, and then we're going to build off of it from there. So whenever you start a new row with circular brick stitch, now here's another thing. There is a thing called a half hitch knot. I call them anchor knots because I feel like that's what they do. So what you do is you pick up that thread bridge, you take your needle, you go under the thread bridge, you have that loop, and then you go through that loop, and then you pull. And that's just a little knot that helps secure. I'm gonna move my pliers because it's like those box joints and the pliers are magnetically drawn. That thread goes straight for those box joints and it's gonna get hung up. All right. And that's what that does is that little knot just helps keep that little core, it keeps that core tight. And that's not like a Peloton thing where they're like, keep your core tight. It just means that it's just going to keep that from not wobbling everywhere. And then you have a bunch of problems where the tension gets off and you end up pulling it out and it's loose or gets too tight. All right. So you put that little half hitch knot in there and it makes that little 3. Now, whenever you start a row with brick stitch, whether it's circular or flat, unless you're trying to do some kind of decrease or something, generally speaking, you're going to pick up 2 of your seed beads. So then you go underneath the thread bridge, and then you go up through that 1 bead, and then you want the second bead that you added, and you want to kind of position things in place. You're in charge. So pick that up and position it in place. And then, so right now it looks like I'm making like white corn something, but it's not. Or it could be, I guess. But anyway, so pick up and then just go around your little 3 beads to finish the row. You pick up a bead, you go under the thread bridge, and then you go up through the bead. Now, brick stitch, I feel, is kind of one of those intuitive things, especially if the beads are not all the same. When they're all kind of graduated in uniform, you can kind of figure out a pattern. However, if they're kind of like this, where they're kind of some are smaller and some are larger, it gets where each design is different. So depending on how many you use or how big they are or how much they're off from the other one, it can kind of change how many you use and where you pick up the thread bridge. So some things like when you're working, they always fall in a certain way. With this one, you kind of organically have to kind of put your needle where there's thread and put the bead where it will fit. If the bead doesn't fit, you kind of have to adjust it and space things out so that things will fit nicely. Otherwise, you can try to force things in, but it will start buckling and all kinds of stuff. So I picked up a bead. There's that thread bridge. I go under the thread bridge, pull that nice and secure, put that flat against my other work, and go out up through that and pull that nice and secure. All right. So y'all have seen me do this before, so I'm not going to really go in and talk about it too much because you've seen it before. For people who haven't seen it, I think that's a good kind of primer. I'm just going to finish off this row, and all I'm doing is picking up a seed bead, picking up a thread bridge, going underneath the thread bridge, pulling that nice and secure, and then going up through the bead to kind of secure it in place, and then just keep going around and around and until I get to the end. And I'm almost there at the end, so I'll show you what that looks like. But sometimes you get to a point where you have to like decide, do I skip that and kind of space things out like this? I can, at first, when I hold this like this, it looks like I could fit one more bead in there. But then when I fold these down, look, that does not look it does not. I'm not going to be able to fit another bead in there. So sometimes you just kind of have to play around with it and work with it, and the beadwork will tell you what's what. If you try to force stuff, then you're gonna have this sad time, and then you're breaking beads or you have buckled in the middle or whatever. All right, so when you finish your row, the thread is coming out of this last bead. This is the first bead we added in this row. We're going to go down through the first bead, and then we're going to take our needle and go down through the first bead that we added in that row. Remember, we added that with the 2 beads. And then we're going to go up through the last bead that we added. And that's going to complete the row. Now, if you have to do any kind of adjustments and adjust the tension or whatever, then take the opportunity to do that now. The thread is relatively flexible. It is flexible. So, if you have to push things, then push them, gently encourage them to sit how you want them to sit. So that's kind of the basis of that. All right. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to pick up 2 seed beads here, like so. I'm going to go to my thread bridge. And if you want, and you want to put a half hitch knot or an anchor knot, you could definitely do that. But I'm going to take and go underneath my thread bridge. This is starting a new row. So I pulled it, and there you go. You can see it now. I'm going to go up through that second bead that I added, and I'm going to pull it tight so that it's nice and flush against my circle that I created with my seed beads, right? And we're going to keep going until we get to the size of about of a $50. And I don't actually know how many rows that is, but we'll find out. So this is a point in the live where we turn the spotlight on y'all. So for one, if you have questions, let us know. Number 2, if you're doing anything fun, if are you making stuff, are you reading anything good? I always like to hear because I oftentimes take the recommendations of people and listen to different books or new music or watch a new show or try a new recipe, you know. So this is where y'all kind of, excuse me, will jump in. Michelle says that thread grabs everything. Correct. But also, I feel like it's like a thing where it's like it's got a mat like that. The box joints, I always catch it. It can be the pliers is on the floor, and somehow I end up picking it up. So that's another good reason why it's good to kind of tidy up as you go, because then you have less likelihood of doing that. I guess I can tell you about how I got started with seed beads. So, when I started making jewelry, um, my family, they have a business where they sell beads, and at the time I was helping take care of my niece, and they needed help at a trade show, and I said, okay, I can help out. And so I went to the show, and I realized pretty quickly that if I wanted to be any good at what I was trying to do, or try to sell, I had to know what I was selling, and part of that was learning how um, to make jewelry. And we had always kind of been creative and dabbled and made jewelry, you know, as a hobby. Um, and my grandma, we used to make paper beads. And make those into necklaces, and we'd sell them at church raffles and different things like that. And so we've always been kind of crafty and creative like that. And but anyways, so that's kind of how I got into it. And I got where I was coming at things from kind of an outside perspective. So I had never taken a class in making jewelry. So a lot of the stuff I did, I kind of took from my background in painting and mixed media, which is what I went to school for. I went to school at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. And that's what I my introduction to the professional creative world was a little bit not the same as everybody else. And um, so my designs were a little bit weird, I guess. Um, and so I quickly got picked up by different books and magazines. And so that's how I got started in the bead world. Bonnie said, does this stitch have a name? Yeah, it's called circular brick stitch. This part is called circular brick stitch. I see a couple people said, Cindy says, I'm getting ready for vacation, shipping boxes to my sisters so they don't have to carry my beads and tools. That's smart. You're coming up in September, right? I believe that's in the 1st of September. Michelle says, the raise in my insulin last month really improved my sugar levels. They just did my blood work again, waiting for results. Oh, good. Well, hopefully that goes well and you have the best and most optimal outcome. Amanda says that she's opening her Allegory gallery package. Oh, good. You know what? If you have another, I don't know if you have another current package, but I have something a little surprise to put in your package. So, your next one. Lily says, hey, Lily, she's one of our Pittsburgh people. She teaches at and works at Crystal Bead Bazaar in Pittsburgh and Lawrenceville. She says, hi, Andrew, what are you making and what stitch are you using? I am making a pair of seed bead wing earrings, and at current, I'm using circular brick stitch. If you're in Pittsburgh, definitely check them out. Um, I haven't met the new owner yet, and just at this point, it's not new. She's been there like a couple of years, but I'm friends with Joanne, who used to own Crystal Bead Bazaar for 20 something years. I actually just saw her out in Tucson. She lives in Panama now, and it's always nice to see her. I only see her when she's in Tucson, so. Michelle says, I got into beading from living in a nursing home, recovering from many strokes and other stuff. My hubby and my friend that I met there and a nurse really helped me learn and improve. Oh boy, I'm sorry to hear that you had to go through all that, but I'm happy to hear that beading was a good part of your healing and recovery and that kind of inspired a new passion. Who knows what would have happened if you hadn't had those things happen. All right. So I reached the end of the row in this circular brick stitch. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to try to push this over and see if they will meet, or if the gap is too big. They will meet. So I'm going to go down through the first bead in that row and up through the last bead in that row that I just added. So up through the first bead, or down through the first bead and up through the last bead. And if you have a great lot of thread showing, you can always disguise it later with a trick that I'm going to show you. So you can always do that. Yeah. If Lily's still watching, one of my friends, Sharon, was looking for beads, some rose quartz beads, and she was in Pittsburgh. And she was like, I'm going to go over there. And I was like, I'm not at the store. And so I sent her to y'all. So hopefully she was able to find what she needed. So I'm starting a new row. This is circular brick stitch. And I picked up 2 beads. I'm going underneath the thread bridge. I'm going to make those sit nice next to each other. I'm going to go up through the second bead and making that sit nice. Amanda says, I visited the US last week. I will probably go again in August. Oh, good. Where'd you go? Did you do anything fun? So I'm just going to continue around. I'm picking up a seed bead and I'm going around, going underneath the thread bridge and going up through the bead that I just added. Michelle says, I would say beading really helped me and still does. All my doctors are for me making jewelry as a form of rehab. That's great. Yeah, beading I think is one of those things that's incredibly healing. I mean, there's some things that can be difficult on your hands or your eyes and different things like that. And that's kind of sometimes not always optimal. However, I do feel like if you find the right thing, it can be very therapeutic. I remember we kind of had an unofficial kind of grief group going at the shop where people had recently lost people in their lives, and somehow they all kind of found each other through, because we're in a relatively small town. And so they started coming to the shop, and it was every I can't remember what day it was, but it was we would meet once a week, and we would just hang out and make stuff and drink some coffee or tea or whatever. And back in the day, I used to keep a pitcher of sangria, so if it really got intense, we would get that out. But anyways, so yeah, I think it can be very therapeutic. And I love that beading brings people together. Um, I feel very fortunate to be able to do what we do. I just heard of another store closing down in Virginia. And they opened a year before we did. And I didn't know them at the time of when they opened, and I don't think they knew me. But they went to a show, and I was at a show, and we started talking, and they were like, "Oh, I just opened a store," and I was like, "I just opened a store." And so, even though I don't actually get to go, I have never actually been to their physical store. It had been kind of one of those things where I kind of grew up with them and they kind of grew up with us. It kind of felt like that, where we were coming up and we're in a couple of different store owner groups and we would talk about things. And, um, it's one of those things where it's kind of sad to see them closing, but they're supposedly going to keep going online. And I'm not going to say who it is because a couple people are like, who is it?" And I kind of know, I don't know. I kind of feel like if they wanted me to tell that information, they would tell me to tell that information. But I'm not going to just like name them because I know that it can sometimes be difficult to go through making those kind of hard decisions for your business. So I'm going to be respectful of them. So anyways, I'm just continuing this row or on the circular brick stitch. So anyways, I started with stringing mostly. So that's my background is stringing and making beads, physical, like making the beads to work with. So that's where I started making jewelry. And then when I started writing for books and magazines, at the time blogs were super popular. And so I started a blog, and I don't really post to it anymore. But yeah, so I had that blog for years and years and years. I met a lot of really wonderful people through it. And that kind of was the inspiration for, or one of the inspirations of opening the store. It's kind of the community that formed around the blog. Some of you I know from back then, from the blogging days. Maya says we drove over the St. Lawrence River, drove through, excuse me, Ogdensburg to Watertown. We didn't stay long. We are hoping to go back and have more time and head towards Vermont. Um, and then, so after that, I met somebody who had a shop in town, and we lived at the time. We lived out on 90 acres, out in the middle of the woods, y'all. And we moved from New York City to here, and I was like, I don't know, there's not that much to do right here. So we would come into town, and I met some of the merchants and stuff, and we were customers, and we got to know some people that way. All right, and finishing off this row, so I'm going to go down through the first bead that I added in that row and up through the last bead. And they reckoned that we were out and about. I had cancer and recovered from having cancer, and we were celebrating. And there was a store or a restaurant that opened, and they filled our heads with all these ideas of being entrepreneurs and working for ourselves and all that. And uh, Clay and Lacey at Mountain Palace, they filled my head with all these ideas of having our own store. It's one of those things that we had kind of talked about as like a one day, someday, maybe kind of situation. Like William, he used to play store with his cousins with an old wooden desk, and he would play the money person. Um, and I used to go to this shop in Orlando when I was growing up, and I didn't have very much money. We were very poor. And the shop owner kind of sensed that. So she used to give me these little odd jobs around the shop. And then she would like trade me for store credit, and I could get little things here and there. And I used to save up money. We used to, I don't know if people still do this, but I used to collect aluminum cans, and we would smash the aluminum cans and take them in for our pocket money, as one of our side jobs that we would do. We were always doing side jobs to make money. And so we would take that money and then go to that little store. And so that always inspired me to have a little store at some point. Not necessarily to sell stuff, just to sell stuff, because there are way easier ways of making money. Let me just tell you. But I loved and admired the sense of community and the impact that that had on my life. And I always wanted to extend that to others. And so that's kind of the origin of how we kind of came up with the idea of having the store. So we were out celebrating after we went to that restaurant. We were their first and probably their only customers that day, and we went out and about because I had paid off all of my cancer bills and my medical debt, and that was a pretty big thing. And so we went and ran into one of the merchants randomly out and about, and they said, "You know what? There's a space in the front of the store that used to be occupied by a restaurant or a little cafe." And if somebody doesn't take that spot, I'm going to lose my store in the back. And if I can't find somebody to fill that spot, then I'm going to lose my business, basically. And so we were like, no. And but at first they said, "Do you want to open a store?" I said, "Heck no." And then the next day we rolled up with tape measures and started measuring the space. Somehow they worked some kind of voodoo magic on my brain, and that's how that got started, and then the rest is history. But so I started seed beading not because I started with seed beads. A lot of people start with seed beads, but I started with stringing, and I come from a background of stringing. So I started seed beading because when you have a bead store, people, they're like, "Where are the seed beads?" And so we don't really sell a ton of seed beads generally. We can get them in, and we have kind of a basic assortment, but that's not our specialty. Um, but so I started seed beading because people would bring things in, and at the time we used to repair stuff, and I would have to repair these things, and I had to learn. And so one of my first teachers was a woman named Dottie Westerfelt, and she taught me a lot about seed beading. Let's see. Oh, people are talking about how to control their blood levels or their insulin levels. Hopefully, you all are staying healthy out there and doing the best you can. I'm gonna do one more row around. I don't want these to be great, big, huge earrings, but I also want them to make a statement. So I'm going to just add one more row, and then we'll go to the next part of this project. Because at this point, y'all are like, he showed us circular brick stitch before. What are we doing? This is a weird kind of circular wing. Um, but it'll become something nice, I promise. Um, or I think it's nice. Maybe you don't like it, but I like it. Um, by the time we reach the end of this row, I'm going to have to add some thread, I believe, which is not a problem. But if you haven't added thread, I think I show adding thread a little bit differently than some of the other folks. Um, and one thing you should also keep in mind is you want to keep that tension just right, because if you pull too hard, it can do some weird things with your circle. And what I mean by weird is it can cause it to buckle and almost cup. And if you want to have like a cup or like a beaded a, a bead cap or something for a large bead, then that may be what is maybe good. But for this project, I don't want that to happen. So every once in a while, I'm adjusting as I go to make sure that this is nice and flat. And as I'm working, it's going to reinforce that um, the memory that we're in, the structure and the form that we're building in. So as I'm working, I'm trying to keep this super flat so that I don't end up with a bunch of buckling, because it will make like a cup, which is kind of cool. Especially if you're doing flowers, like seed beaded flowers, that's kind of a cool thing. And you purposely want to push that in there and flare that out so that it becomes more cup shaped. But for this part, I want this to be perfectly flat. I have seen some people do all kinds of things. Somebody was like, they put floor wax or some kind of floor thing on their beadwork, and I've never done that, so I can't speak to it. But I don't know. It I can see what they're doing, like the rationale of it, of like stiffing it up, but it just, I don't know. It seems like that's not something that the beads want to do. But I don't know. I haven't seen it. I kind of feel like it would leave a kind of film on the beads, but maybe they got some kind of secret that I don't know about. Michelle said Florox. I don't know. I just hear things on the internet sometimes, and it's kind of like sometimes you hear something, somebody being like, "Oh, I love to put raisins in my potato salad," and you're like, "Oh, um, and maybe that's what they do. They like it. If it works for them, all the best to them." Excuse me. Harry says, I often sew the finished piece to a round filigree. Oh, for extra security or to keep it flat. Yeah, that's something that you can definitely do. Filigree is a good option for that because it is lightweight, especially in things like earrings. I feel like um, you want to keep things as light as possible. You don't want to be like those Borneo style ladies who are dragging their earlobes down. Um, Unless you are, and then more power to you. But anyway, so there's a lot of different things that you see on the internet, and sometimes those things will resonate with you and make sense for you in your process, and sometimes they won't. So I always caution people because sometimes people, and this is a common thing that I see a lot. Sometimes people are very into selling stuff, which as a small business owner, I can appreciate and understand that they want to stay in business. But sometimes they don't necessarily try stuff out necessarily, but they're trying to develop content. And so they do things that they don't really have experience with, and sometimes there's misinformation. Believe it or not, y'all, there's misinformation in the on the internet, um, which I think we all are kind of aware of that at this point in our lives. But that's the bead world is not excluded from that. So there are a lot of things where people will say and do things, um, and then it's not always right. Or like me, an example that I did was I was using Nymo and kept calling it silk, and it is not silk. It's a nylon thread. But I kept calling it a silk, and that is not accurate. So, sometimes when you're making stuff, you just get something in your head and you're just making stuff. And especially when you're on camera, sometimes it can be a little bit nerve wracking where you're trying to like stay entertaining and stay creating. And it's not as easy as it seems to talk and do what you're doing at the same time and showing stuff. All right, so here we go. We've reached the end of this row, and I'm going to go down through the first bead in that row and up through the last bead in that row. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to pull too tight because I just saw it kind of buckle a little bit, but I want to pull it tight enough that they're sitting next to each other, but not so tight that it makes the ones in the middle pop up. So now I've been working in a clockwise way, moving like this. So the thread has been moving this direction. So I'm going to actually go to a step backwards, and this thread bridge here, I'm going to pick up underneath that thread bridge, and then I'm going to go and do that half hitch or anchor knot and put that in there. And you can see that's just to tighten things up. And the other reason I'm doing that is because I've kind of finished this part of this component. So this part of the earrings is for all intents and purposes. This part is done. Well, kind of. I can embellish it, but this part is relatively done. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some thread. And one of the things when I'm constructing pieces, I kind of think about things of where the best place to add thread is, and also where things will meet. Because when you're making structural pieces, particularly things that are going to get a lot of wear, with earrings and stuff, you're not necessarily going to have a great deal of weight on it, when you're not necessarily going to have a great deal of movement, like bead on bead movement. So you don't have to be as good of an engineer when it comes to this. But if you're doing this and you're adapting this to, say, a bracelet or a necklace or something that's going to have more motion and more friction and more movement, you do have to think about things in a kind of an engineering way, where you don't want to end things on like the knots you make. You want to have stuff where you can weave things in. And that way, if something tags snags on it, the whole thing doesn't come apart. Only one part will get kind of distorted, and then you can go back and fix it, as opposed to having to remake the whole entire project. So just keep that in mind. All right, so this is circular brick stitch, and now here is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to add some more thread to my project. And so this is that thermally bonded thread in a crystal color. I'm going to make a slip knot. So I'm going to take 2 fingers. I'm going to take the end of the thread and go over those 2 fingers and make a loop. It's harder to see with the crystal or the white thread, because it kind of like disappears. And that's kind of the goal of this thread, is that it disappears. With the black stitching, it shows up and can become a decorative element. And I guess if you use darker beads, you could use the white stitching like as a top stitch to kind of as a decorative element. But in most cases, you want to pair your thread to the beads that you're working so that the thread disappears, so that you don't actually see it. That's the goal usually, unless you're going to do something where you're going to incorporate the thread as a design element, and then they comes in all different kind of colors, and you can use that. All right, so I folded this over, made that loop, and then I'm going to take the short tail. I'm going to slice this loop in half, and I'm going to take my 2 fingers, take that thread that's slicing the loop in half, and pull that up, and it creates a slip knot. All right. And what I'm going to do is I leave my needle on this so that I know which is the thread that I added, and which one is the current working thread, and which one's the new working thread. So I'm going to slip this over the needle and the thread the working thread, and then I'm going to hold this down, and I'm going to pull that slip knot closed. And then if you pull it, you can actually hear a snap sometimes. One day I'll stop talking while I'm doing that, and then you'll actually hear it. But you should hear a snap. And that is the way you know it's thoroughly not secured. These have big holes, so I'm going to actually do some more knots so that it's really secure. But I'm going to take the current working thread and the shorter leg, and I'm going to do an overhand knot. And then I'm going to do another overhand knot, but I'm going to go and wrap it around twice as I go through. So 1 and 2. And that's going to lock that in. And, that's really, you're going to have a nice sturdy connection. All right. So I'm going to take this needle off, and put this on the longer piece of thread right now, or the longer piece of thread. And I'm going to do that off camera because it's a little bit easier if I can hold it closer to my face, as opposed to looking at it through the camera. Sorry, y'all. But you've seen people thread a needle before. All right. So the thing that I'm going to do now is I've got all of my threads coming out of this hole here. All right. So one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get all of my extra threads that I have to weave into my work and pull them out of the way. That's what the first step I'm going to do, because it can get real tangly real fast. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go into the bead next to it and go down through the top of it, out through the bottom of it, and I'm going to go up through the bead next to it and out through the top. I'm going to kind of pull it, and then I'm just going to work my way down a little bit. And what this is doing, it's doing two things. It's tightening up my beadwork, it's reinforcing it, it's reinforcing the shape of the circle, and I'm also working this thread away from where I added it. Because, like I said, I don't want my beadwork to end on where I added the knot, all right? Because that will create a weak spot, and I don't want to create a weak spot. So this is not a perfect circle. It's getting there, but it's not a perfect circle, and that's okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of triangulate where my kind of flat spot is. So the flat spot probably is over here, but this is also kind of flat up on the top. And what I mean by that is like, it's kind of like when you have an orange and it sits on your counter for a long time and it gets flat on the bottom. Then, don't eat then usually. But anyway, so I'm looking for that kind of flat spot so that I can add my embellishment. But we're going to pick this spot where we are right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up, this is where it gets random, y'all. If it wasn't random before, it's random now. So I'm going to pick up however many of these beads I want. I'm going to say 3. And then I'm going to pick up one of these gold metal beads. I should really put those on the little mat, and then I can pick them up a little bit easier. And then I'm going to pick up maybe 2 of the size 8s, or 3, I guess, because it's wanting to sit there. And then I'm going to put this down. I'm going to drag this down to the bottom, and then I can kind of see. I'm going to pick up another one of these gold beads, and then maybe 2 of these ivory colored beads, and 1 of this gold, and then maybe 1 of the white, and then 1 of the gold, and then let's do maybe 5 of the white. All right. And then I'm going to pull this down till I get to the end. And then I can test to see how long I want to make these. So some people don't like shoulder dusters. If you don't like shoulder dusters, you can modify this design so that it's not super long. Yeah, this is kind of a shoulder duster design if you make it longer. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up one of these drops, one of these Mayuki drops, and then I'm going to go back up through the beads that I just strung on, and I'm making a fringe. Now, if you can't make it all the way up, have the needle exit, and then you pull your tension. It's a little bit easier when the row is shorter, but if it's not, then you can adjust it. And then when you go, and I'm having this laying flat, so because if I feel like I'm not putting any pressure on this fringe that I'm adding, and so that's nice because then it kind of it doesn't kind of fight against you. The gravity doesn't fight against you. So I went up through about half of my row there, and I'm going to take the needle and go back up through the rest of it. Now I'm going to go up through this bead here that was in the last row that we added on the circular brick stitch part. And I'm going to pull this tight. And then I'm going to let this kind of drop. And I'm also going to hold the thread and kind of massage it. And that sounds weird, but the idea of this is if you pull too tight, look what happens if you pull too tight. It gets this weird kind of wonka doodle. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't flow right. So you want this to have a natural, like it's going to bend and flow. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up through this bead in the next row. Like so. And then I'm going to add another row of fringe. And what I'm going to do is, since I'm working kind of randomly, I'm going to look at the previous row. And I'm going to try not to make the gold touch where there's gold. So this is all kind of random, and I want to keep that kind of random vibe. So I don't have a system per se of where I want this, but I do know that I don't want the gold to be next to the gold. If it happens, it's not the end of the world, but it just gives it a nice kind of, it gives it a nice look when it's more interspersed. And what I can do is I can hold this in my hand while I'm beading. I'm just going to move these up on here on my little piece of felt because it makes picking up the beads a little bit easier. They're not all trying to scuttle away. And then I'm just going to pick up some beads as I'm going, and then I can test out the look, right? So I know that if I'm going to have this come here like so, then I don't want to put the next bead as gold. So I'm going to pick some, maybe 2 white or 2 ivory colored, 1 gold. And I'm going to put this down through. I'm going to keep adding some of these cream colored ivory, the pearl kind of vibe. I think I'm going to add the gold here. And the gold is kind of like a little bit of bling. So if you don't put that, if it doesn't like happen every time, that's all right. You know, you can kind of space it out and use it as much or as little as you want to. It's up to you. So I'm just going to add 1 more gold, and then, whoop, I flicked that across the room, y'all. And then what I'm going to do is I've got this laid out, and I want this to stop short of the previous row. I don't want them to be the same length. If you want to make them the same length, that is totally an option that you can do. And it will have like kind of like a comedy kind of dream catcher kind of vibe. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up one of these drops, and then I'm going to go back up through this row. So that's kind of basically what I'm doing. I'm just adding fringe to this piece, and I'm staggering the length of the piece so that it's kind of descending order. So the next row that I add is going to be done in the same way that I just showed you, except I'm going to have it be shorter than this one. And if you have, like what I did, where I was trying to use the length of the needle to push it through instead of having to like stop and start in the middle of it. And if you do that, sometimes you have to, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I'm tugging this so that it's keeping the tension as I go into the next row of fringe. but I also don't want it to be too tight. So keep that in mind. This is like a lesson in keeping things loose, but tight, but loose, but tight, but loose, but tight. So I've got this. I'm going to add some more up to this fringe. Michelle says, I'm still not very good at with fringe, so love this. Oh, good. Well, everybody does it differently. So just keep that in mind. I know sometimes people are like, you have to do it like this, and then it may not work for you. So you kind of have to play around until you find the thing that works for you. I like to see the pattern. Sometimes people don't care or they count. Like some people count stuff. I'm not a big counter when it comes to seed beading. I do a lot of stuff visually or how things kind of fall. I'm not like I could never knit or crochet from a pattern. Um, some people, their minds, they work like that. I knew somebody, they could do the quadratic equation in their head to cut the different quilting squares that they would need next. And my brain does not work like that. I can guarantee you, I don't have a TI-83 in the back of my skull that does that. So, yeah. All right. So I'm going to, let's see how many I've got on here. I've got there. That looks good. So I'm just going to add that drop, and then I'm going to go back up through that, adjusting tension if I need to. And I'm just going to continue around. And this is going to be like the wing part. This is kind of a stylized version of a wing in my mind. Maybe an angel wing. Also, if you are like, you get into this project and you're like, I am not going to be able to make two of this, that's fine. You can always turn this into a pendant, and this would be quite all right as a pendant. Now, as you can see, or maybe you can't see, there's a loop up here at the top that is from the tension going wonky. So I'm pulling that tight and making sure that that goes and lays correctly. And then I'm going to go down through the next bead in that row. And all of the while that I'm doing this, I'm being slightly cognitive that uh, of how this is going to lay. So I want this to be an earring. So this is going to be the longest point, and then there's going to be an ear wire up at the top. So just keeping that in mind. And then, so I'm going to add another row here. I'm probably going to do 5 rows. Now, it's up to you. If you use smaller beads, like if you did 11s and then you did a row and then you did all your rows and then went back and added another length to it, you can really fill these out and make them really cool and dangly and full and kind of magical looking. That's going to take a while if I show it, and especially if, because I'm not super fast, so it can take a while to do that. Fringe, I feel like, is really beautiful, but it does take a while. So I like the movement of fringe, and I like the way it kind of looks kind of, I don't know. I like the movement and sway of fringe. It has a very bohemian vibe. It adds a little bit of texture to your piece. So I like that also. And I think that's nice when you can kind of design with different elements in mind. And, it's fun that way. So if you want to have a fuller look, just do a fuller look. Um, there's not fringe. I think is nice because there aren't super a lot of rules about what you have to do or don't do. Like some things you have to do certain things a certain way, otherwise it won't work. But I kind of like that. There's this organic play and you can just add stuff. And if it doesn't look right, you can always take it apart. That's the thing. It's like you're not committed to that until the end of time. So you're definitely going to use less of these drop beads as you are some of the other beads that you're using in this pattern. So I'm just going to go back up through this, and then we add one more, and then we'll kind of, if I decide to add more, I can add more later. Now, if you have anywhere where it's coming, see, like this is where there's a big gap in that. So I want to keep that tension nice and tight so that I don't have that loose kind of gap look. And then I want to take, and this is definitely a stylized wing. This is not, you know, somebody may see this and not necessarily identify it as a wing. But the other thing is that I can also come back over and add another shorter row, and that'll give that kind of wing-like shape if I want. I can do really short rows, and that will be fine as well. All right, so again, this is the point where I'm just showing you stuff that I just demonstrated. So I'm going to continue along, adding fringe to my piece. But I like the little bit of gold because it's a little bit of bling in it. Michelle says it's the tension, still need to get it right. Yeah, that's the thing with fringes. You have to have the right tension, otherwise it looks messy. So, you know, again, practice makes perfect. And yeah, so I'm gonna add. So these ones, when they hang, they kind of hit at the same spot. So I'm going to take these off. And here's another trick. Whenever you're going to take beads off, don't use the needle, the tip of the needle to go back through. Use the butt of the needle to go through, because if you use the tip of the needle, you can do two things. You can tie a knot inside of the beads. You can also do what's called splitting a thread. And that's also less than ideal, because then if you split the thread, you're basically sewing it in for all time into your beadwork. So it becomes significantly more difficult to get it off again. So I always back out the needle using the butt of the needle as what I'm using to go through. Does that make sense? All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is, since I finished off this row, I think I might add two small rows, so that, let me pull this. Now, sometimes this bead, your stop bead, is going to be kind of the thing that holds it up, and that's what it's going to catch on. So you do have to kind of be a little bit delicate with that, but maybe I will, maybe I won't. Okay, I won't. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up through the next bead in the last row of my circular brick stitch. I'm going to tie a half hitch knot or an anchor knot here using this following thread bridge. And I'm going to go back up through that bead that I just came out, and I'm going to come up through the bead in the previous fringe row. Now this sometimes is tricky because we'll want to go up through the fringe. And what we're going to do is called a picot stitch. And this is kind of a finishing stitch for some of like your peyote stitch. And I'm going to pick up 3 of these size 11 kind of silver matte finish beads. And I'm going to go into the next bead in that last row of the circular brick stitch. And then I'm going to come up through the next one. I'm just going to go around this. And this is kind of finishing this off. And the reason why I'm doing this is that, for one, it adds another kind of textural element. The other thing is that it hides some of the thread bridges. The other thing is that it also smooths the transition between the fringe and the beadwork that I've just added. So I'm just adding this around as I go. And what I can also do, like I just showed you, is if I need to go and add a stitch in between, I can always add like an anchor stitch or a half hitch stitch and go back through, and I can do the in between the beads. Like, see how this one, I'm just going this like it's every other bead. I can go back through and add in between that, so it's continuously around, because we skip a bead when we're doing this. Now, like I did with this, make sure you don't catch the fringe on your piece. We're going to continue this picot stitch. Now you can go and do this one at a time, where you do it 3 and then go through the same bead and then go up through it. It gives it a little bit more of a studded look. I'll show you, but I'm going to take it out after. I'm going to make sure I don't split that thread. And of course, I didn't add 3 beads to that. So anyways, that was not ideal. And if you do have a part where, like that, I accidentally split the thread, I just told you about not doing that, and I just did it. You have to take your needle off and pull it out. And do that now as opposed to waiting, because if you just like continue along and just like, oh, it'll go away, it doesn't go away. It actually gets worse. So just do that. So anyways, that's kind of like a version of that picot stitch. And I'm going to add my needle back onto my thread, and I'm going to continue around until I get to the other side of my piece. I also have to think about, when I'm constructing this, where my ear wires are going to attach to my component that I'm making. Now, another thing is after, I don't know if y'all experience this or not, but after a while, sometimes you have to go and you have to trim the end of your thread off. And I sometimes do that at an angle, so that when I'm doing that, it almost makes it its own needle to fit through the end of the eye of the needle. All right. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going through. Well, for one, I'm gonna thread my needle. But sometimes when you're messing around with this, it can kind of get messed up. So, and it can want to split. All right, hold on one moment, please, as I finish threading this up. I'm going to thread this off. I'm doing this off camera because I can see it a little bit better, as opposed to trying to struggle on camera. I watched this one live video, and the person couldn't get their needle threaded on the camera. And instead of just pulling the needle off camera and threading it real quick, they struggled for like 30 minutes trying to show people. And you know, I get it, because the camera's in the way, so it makes it a little bit awkward. So yeah, that's not always ideal. But I think just better take it off camera and thread it, as opposed to like trying to struggle. And then, you know, you waste all your time showing how to do this thing. All right, so I'm just gonna keep going around this. Like all things, I'm making sure that the tension is good and that I'm not, I'm not pulling too tight, but also not too loose, just right, Goldilocks style. So this isn't a real picot stitch. A real picot stitch is when you go back through that same bead. This is kind of like you're skipping, but it's almost the same thing, but a little bit different. And I think that comes from the embroidery world, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong. I could be making stuff up. All right, so I'm almost all the way around. And this is also a place where you can, if you want to add a little bit of bling, you could go back through and add some more gold to kind of break up all that kind of white on white business. And yeah, all right. It's up to you. Depending on how you do things, it'll change the look. So I always tell people now. One thing that you can do if these like flyaways are making you crazy, is sometimes I will stop what I'm doing and go through and weave these in, and then I don't have all these things getting in the way. Because sometimes that can be really frustrating when you're trying to make progress, and then the thread ends that you have to work in eventually are constantly getting in the way. Yeah, that's super frustrating. So what I'm going to do is I can call it a day and leave it like this, and finish it off by weaving in the ends and then adding a little beaded loop. So instead of doing 3, I can add a little loop, and reinforce that loop, going through it at least 2, but ideally 3 or more times, so that it's nice and sturdy and it's not hanging by a thread. And then I can add my ear wire to this so that I can hang it down. And then in theory, I'm making 2 of these so they match. I might come back through and add a little short little piece right here it so that it looks more like a wing, like right here, you know? But anyways, so I could call it a day like that. Now, if I didn't want to make this like this color, I could start off making this core a different color and do bands so it looks like a bullseye. And I can also, I've got these sequins out, and these are gold sequins, these are vintage sequins. But I can also stitch these on to this circular shape. And I can do that, adding them in rows like that, or going around and making a spiral. It's really up to you and how you want your wing to look. But these are using this color way, this kind of ivory, pearlescent ivory and gold. And so it's really up to you about how much and how little you embellish these. Because in my mind, they're almost done. All I have to do is just make that beaded loop and add an ear wire. But if you want to add more decorative elements, you can go back through and, like I said, add the gold in between to kind of carry the gold around the piece. Or if you want to continue that kind of 3 in between, you can go back through and it'll add some decorative elements. But for me, what I'm probably going to do, and I'm probably going to do this off of camera, and because it's going to take a little bit of time to do this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add sequins, and I'm probably going to do a spiral, and that's going to take a little bit of time. And I know y'all probably have other things in your life that you have to do, and we're coming up on 2 hours here. So I've got my vintage sequins. I know we put vintage sequins in a lot of our mixes, and sometimes people are like, what the heck do you do with this? So the way that I incorporate vintage sequins in some of my seed bead work is, if I'm doing this, I'm going to get rid of all of my. If I'm going to be doing this for real, I'm going to get rid of all my thread ends, and then I'm going to do this step, because this is a very easy time to get tangled up, and then you end up with all these weird little loops. So I've got my thread coming up in the middle of my beadwork. I'm going to put on one sequin, and then I'm going to pick up one of these size 11s, and I'm going to get this closer to you so you can actually see this. And then I'm going to go back through the sequin, and I'm going to go up through the bead in the next row. So this bead that I added, I'm going to flip on the side, and I'm going to gently train it to do that. Now, if you wanted to, you could also use those drops, and those drops would also be cool. And they actually would sit much better than this little seed bead. So I might actually end up taking that out next and then doing that. And then just going, and then I'm going to go back into the next bead, pick up a sequin, pick up a bead, go back through the sequin, go through this one, and then keep going around and around. But that's going to take another, I don't know, 30 minutes to an hour. So I'm not going to do that and make you watch that. So I'm just going to finish this up off camera, and then hopefully I'll show it. I have all my pieces in different places, so I haven't been able to show the finished pieces as I've got them done. So maybe check back tomorrow at the very least. And then I can show you the finished pieces. How about it? All right. We've just hit our 2-hour mark. And I need a drink because my throat is dry like the Sahara Desert. So I might actually instead, I might do these. These might be too small, but they're size 15s. And the cool thing about these sequins is if you can use one bead, or you could do a loop. So you could add 10 beads and then go back through and make a loop. Those get super snagged on everything, but it does look really cool. It makes this really kind of lush, kind of like shag carpet look. So you can always do that if you want to. It's up to you how you do that. But yeah, so I hope you all enjoy that. We did circular brick stitch and fringe on circular brick stitch to make these wing earrings. And I may leave it. I may take that off. You never know. You kind of have to do this. The reason why I may take that off is because this is kind of a yellow gold, and it's kind of bright. But if I use these bigger beads, I might cover that up a little bit. So yeah. All right. Hopefully you all had fun and you enjoyed hanging out. Please do like and share our videos and posts. It helps boost the signal and get the word out there about our content and the things that we have on offer. Also, if there are things that you need, just head on over to allegorygallery.com and pick up those things that you need. We've got the Summer of Beading Summer of Fantasy Bead in the New Year this month, going on all July. If you don't finish in July, nobody's going to get mad at you. You can keep posting all year long if you want. But it's definitely set up so that if you want a daily prompt, that prompt is there available for your leisure. And yeah, so that's going on. And if you want to pick anything up for that, definitely take advantage of our online store, www.allegorygallery.com. And if there is something that you need that you don't see online, You can always email us at info@allegorygallery.com. And don't forget, if you missed yesterday's video on the sea glass, check that out because there's still lots of leftover. So there are a lot of really cool things up for grabs, and I hope you all take advantage of that. All right. Have a great night, everybody. We'll see you back tomorrow. All right. See ya.